Welcome to the first breakout session here at Rackspace Solve New York on the main stage. Here to talk about 3 steps to achieve business agility with OpenStack clouds. Please welcome Senior Analyst from Forrester Research, Lauren Nelson.
Welcome to the first breakout section. My name is Lauren Nelson, and I'm a senior analyst at Forrester. I've been covering private cloud for many years now, since 2009. And I work with lots of large organizations on developing their cloud strategies. I've worked with the World Bank, I've worked with Capital Group, Capital One, TD Ameritrade, you name it. A large number of organizations on figuring out what they're going to do with cloud. Now, the nice thing about being part of a research organization is that I don't have a stake in the game. So I get to be as blunt and as truthful as I want when it comes to talking about cloud services. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about OpenStack, and then go through and bring up some panelists to ask them some questions about enterprise adoption. So one of the biggest things you hear about OpenStack today is questions around whether it meets enterprise needs and being able to meet complex use cases in the cloud today. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of that, but first, let's talk about OpenStack. There hasn't been a session yet today that really talks about OpenStack, what it is. So for those that are not familiar, those that want to get the primer, OpenStack is a cloud platform. It's not a private cloud suite, it's not a cloud manager. How many of you have heard the term CMP? Any hands? I hate that term. CMP, Cloud Management Platform, is used to describe so many different types of cloud environments out there when really you're comparing apples to oranges. Cloud platforms are things that help you build a cloud. They are the building components behind an actual cloud solution. There are separate capabilities that are responsible for management. And yes, every cloud platform has some cloud management capabilities. In fact, many of them have all the management capabilities you would need for a very basic private cloud. Most organizations, though, they need a lot more when it comes to management. They need some advanced monitoring and management capabilities, and they also want to connect into public cloud platforms. That's what we call cloud management. Now, a lot of the tools available in the market do both. They're what we call private cloud suites. A lot of private cloud suites have a default cloud platform in them. For a lot of them, that is OpenStack, or their version of OpenStack beneath their private cloud suite. Some people just adopt OpenStack as a platform, pure OpenStack as its actual cloud platform. Others purchase it within an actual suite, whether it's a proprietary tool or not. There's also solutions out there that just hit the cloud management capability. Anybody know any solutions that fit that description? That don't have a cloud platform within it by default? Cloud Bolt, RightScale, Dell Cloud Manager. There's a long list of tools that just do cloud management. OpenStack just plays in that cloud platform space, although a lot of the tools and partners you would see in this space will include both and be an actual private cloud suite. Now, OpenStack, this is the 101, what you need to know about OpenStack. This was started in 2010. Twice a year they have a release, April and October. They have a fancy summit in fun locations where they talk about what the latest and greatest of those releases are. It's not just one software tool. It's composed of a lot of different projects with fun names to go along with it. You also see that there's a lot of different ways to adopt OpenStack. You can do pure code OpenStack for free. There are distros where a vendor has changed it or adjusted it in certain ways that they think make it more viable for enterprise adoption. There are partners in the space that don't actually have an OpenStack distribution, but help you adopt it in a different way. So they'll help with the networking side or storage side to make some use cases more viable. You'll also see some fancy logos for a lot of these organizations on those that are using OpenStack today. Some of these are more well-known than others. When we look at OpenStack, this is my fancy chart that I generally point out for this. In terms of the projects that you need to know about, OpenStack has 6 core projects. In order for a vendor to have one of those fancy little OpenStack certified OpenStack seals, they need to be able to pass an automated API test of compatibility against the 6 major parts of the core. So in this, Horizon is not part of core, Swift is, but the rest of those most heavily adopted projects are part of core. If you are a vendor that has a certificated stamp, you must be able to have an API compatibility with each of these projects. This is what the end user claimed adoption is. So for those of you that don't know, every 6 months, there's a user group that surveys all of the users of OpenStack about what they're doing with OpenStack. It is fielded by users, it is created by users, and it is answered by users about how they're using OpenStack today. So if you want answers in terms of what is being done with OpenStack, this is the best data set you're going to be able to find in the market in terms of what's being done. I'm a data geek. I love these numbers. I'm the first to question viability in certain different ways, but this is a pretty darn good view of the market and what's being done and what's not being done with OpenStack. Some things you'll notice there. OpenStack private clouds very rarely are standalone. Very rarely is it just someone's own OpenStack environment with nothing else involved. Usually it's connected to other clouds. And often it's connected to AWS clouds. You also see a large number of users here. You also see a very large implementations of OpenStack. So here, the largest is listed here at 300,000 cores. There's a lot of other very large OpenStack environments that aren't listed here in the 100,000 to 200,000 range. So very large OpenStack environments. And these are not vendor examples. Those are end user examples of OpenStack environments. So what are people doing today with OpenStack? Last year for the summit, I actually did a series of interviews where I went and interviewed all of the major OpenStack users with no vendors on the line and got their very blunt version of what they like about OpenStack, what they don't, what they've been doing, what they haven't been doing. And the thing that came across over and over again is that OpenStack is not just test dev use cases, although it is a major use case of OpenStack usage today. It is also being used in production, but not in production for existing systems of record workloads. It is being targeted at systems of engagement workloads, workloads that are net new in their environment. And this is an interesting point. Now, some people will point out and ask about systems of record and specific workloads and whether they ever will be in an OpenStack environment. When I talk to these folks, these kind of OpenStack connoisseurs, those that have been in the trenches for quite some time, when I ask them about their future plans, they say the only reason they would move their systems of record workloads over to OpenStack is if there was a viable cost reason of doing so. In their mind, they have their next-gen cloud environment that is for net new development opportunities for the future of their application portfolios. And they have a separate virtualization environment for their systems of record. And that's not about incompatibility. In their minds, what it is about is, why would I pay for additional licenses to move these workloads over? Why would I get those teams involved that are going to slow down my private cloud environment when the real value of a cloud environment is making it a true cloud and focusing on net new examples? What is my benefit of moving it over to a cloud? And this highlights private cloud for a lot of organizations is no longer this transformational journey to cloud, as folks would like to believe. A lot of organizations see it as, I will enhance my virtualized environment on the back end. That is a no-brainer. We need more standardization, we need more automation. But when I'm talking about my cloud environment, it needs to be a cloud environment, but on-premise. And I'm going to build that environment to be a cloud based on the examples that a public cloud provider has set on low-cost infrastructure, on reducing hypervisor licensing costs, on focusing on net new opportunities in a cloud environment. And so it's just a fundamentally different approach to private cloud. And it just so happens is that OpenStack gathers a lot of those like-minded individuals together in this particular project. Now, when you look at what the opportunity is, one of the top things you'll see from folks is, why do I use OpenStack? Some people say, I do it to avoid vendor lock-in, and you can do that at various levels. It depends the solution you use. It depends whether you're picking a vendor that's a converged infrastructure product with all of these resources built in that chooses your particular approach. It certainly minimizes and provides greater transition choices, but today interoperability in the cloud space is not a solved issue. And that's across any single platform or solution you look at. I recently did a report, State of the Cloud, on migration, interoperability, and portability. You can port an app from one environment to another, but it's not going to be easy, it's going to be painful. You're going to lose some of the services that are unique to that particular offering, but that's part of the game today. And that's just what you should expect when you look at cloud services. When you look at the interoperability question, you get the question of, can it work with other things? And one thing that's really good is looking at solutions that have large ecosystems. OpenStack has a large ecosystem. That's one of its benefits. There are other solutions that have large ecosystems. A great example of that, AWS has a very large ecosystem of tools, solutions, vendors that are part of that ecosystem that can help build and help you rapidly adopt that offering and build out the use cases you have. Now, when we look at the key value adds, some of the things you'll come up here is, with open, you have choice. When we look at OpenStack today, one of the things, I had a very flashy title report called OpenStack is Ready, Are You? And the point behind that is it's being used in production by enterprises today, and it has become a standard in the private cloud platform market. And what I mean by that is, if you do not support OpenStack as a cloud platform, as a vendor, you are behind. Almost every single solution in the market has compatibility for OpenStack APIs as a cloud platform across the market. It's hard pointing at a vendor that does not have API compatibility with OpenStack today. And a large percent of the market has OpenStack as its default platform behind that private cloud suite. So from that perspective, OpenStack has become a standard. And because of the progression of the foundation, you also get higher levels of consistency between the solutions as time goes on. So now we have that API certification against the core projects. That is a step towards being more open. That is a step towards greater compatibility and interoperability, portability of workloads. Now, it is also, for a lot of organizations, a great net new launch point for enabling your developers, for building out net new applications. Oftentimes, you hear the term, who here has heard the term bimodal IT? A lot of folks use this as the term to describe the fact that they have their enhanced virtualization environment, and then they have a private cloud environment. And the rate in which they're developing and the teams in which they develop these are different groups of people. So that is one way to look at that as a launch point for net new. The other thing you'll see it for is cost minimization potential. And I put this up as an interesting one. A lot of people use it to build out a KVM-based private cloud environment and to avoid future hypervisor licensing cost. How do we build an environment on KVM or commodity-based infrastructure for net new resources? You also see a number of folks that, looking out into their shiny future, they have the hopes of migrating existing workloads off of expensive hypervisors, expensive licensing costs. This is rarely done today. Very rarely. I only know one known example that has actively done that. But it's the future and what people are hoping. Most folks have no active plans of actually doing that yet today. And then finally, the number one thing you talk to OpenStack users about why they use OpenStack is the community. I've talked to new OpenStack users, I've talked to folks that have been in the community since its founding. And they say the number one reason they use OpenStack is because of the community and the learning group they have. So there's some organizations, they have groups where you can talk to your peers and learn from them in similar situations. Typically those are expensive. Typically quality varies a lot. Typically there's a lot of challenges of really getting high quality peer-to-peer contacts to get a project going. This is an opportunity that a lot of OpenStack experts say is hands down the number one opportunity you're going to have, where you have peer-to-peer contacts about people who are working on the same projects as you, that you can leverage their expertise on problem solving real time. A lot of folks talk about OpenStack, they look at the fancy summits that you can go to, and yes, they're nice locations. Last one was in Tokyo. But more importantly, a lot of the users actually focus on the user summits that they have in very local areas where they send large teams to try and learn and figure out what they're going to do next with OpenStack. So that is around kind of what is being done in terms of what should you do. If you're interested in OpenStack, the general advice that other OpenStack users give is start with one or two use cases. Don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and move your existing virtualization environment as your first move to OpenStack. In fact, most people that have gone this path say, don't expect anything in production within the first 4 to 6 months. You're going to have to get your team ready. You're going to have to figure out your partners. You're going to pick a solution. You're going to have to figure out how to be an OpenStack user. And there's different ways to accelerate that journey. There certainly are. But that's definitely something that you don't want to try and do too much too soon. Consider OpenStack adoption models and figure out who you're going to partner with, which model is right for you from a tool set type. So are you going to adopt pure OpenStack? Are you going to adopt the most current code trunk? Are you going to adopt a distribution provided by a vendor? Are you going to have infrastructure tightly integrated with that? Do you need remote management support from the vendors? Do you want it in your data center, or do you want it in a vendor data center? These are all decisions you'll have to make. And then once you do get to that level, figuring out who to partner with if you want to accelerate that journey. And there are a number of partners in the market. And drum roll, now I'm going to bring up some folks that could be potential future partners of yours. We're going to have a panel. We're going to talk a little bit about what they've done in terms of working with OpenStack professionals in the market. So without further ado, let's bring up Larry, Darren, and Radesh. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Hello.
Nice
Welcome.
Thanks.
So Darren and Radesh have been on stage already today. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they've already talked a little bit about some of the capabilities and some of their announcements that they're presenting at today's presentation. Larry is new to the stage. Larry comes from PlumGrid, which is a SDN solution that essentially provides an integrated version to support OpenStack deployments. So let's hear a little bit from Larry and what his role is here.
Great, thank you. And well, I'm new to the stage. I'm certainly not new to these folks.
That's right.
We've done a number of projects
That's right.
together, and in fact, was excited to see the partnership announced this morning. I was tweeting out pictures of the two of them up on stage. I was very social media savvy.
Thank you for expanding my brand out there. That's great.
You bet. My
appreciate it.
teenage daughters teach me well about how to do things like that. So we do a lot of software-defined networking, and in the context of OpenStack, that's to bring extra security and scale and performance to those projects, and that's where we've ended up doing a number of projects that intersect both with Red Hat and Rackspace.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So to kick off today's session, the point of this panel is to talk a little bit about enterprise use cases and enabling some of the more complex examples in the cloud. You get a lot of folks asking about, can OpenStack be ready for an enterprise use case, and can it handle some of my more complex workloads? So I'd like to just get a quick answer from each of you in terms of, when you're working with folks today, have you seen a lot of enterprise adoption? And if so, do they tend to be kind of production level workloads? Are they more complex? Do they tend to be smaller use cases? Does it change over time? Yeah. So why don't we start with Larry?
Okay. Yeah, I'd say a lot of people are trying things out, and I'd say there is production out there. I would describe it often as light production. So for example, we have a financial services customer who they're not putting transactions through their OpenStack project yet, but they are serving up balances to the mobile apps that are part of their thing. So it gives them a chance to start using it, get experience with it, and I know that they're very committed to moving it into full production over time. So that's about the stage that I'd say is typical out there.
Okay, and what about you, Darren?
So yeah, I would go one step a little bit further and say that we have a lot of our customers that are absolutely running customer-facing, revenue-generating production workloads. It tends to be more the norm in our OpenStack as a service model. A couple of major retailers that run their entire Black Friday storefronts, all the components of their e-commerce applications are running on production OpenStack supported by Rackspace. TD Bank early was on stage. They have customer-facing applications that we have to provide production-level SLAs for their workloads. And then we have enterprise to large mid-market. There are more of our customers that are expecting this and have it running in a production environment than not.
Okay.
So I'll have to agree with Darren here. So from our vantage point, we're seeing production usage across all major geos that we are operating in, right? But it's not hundreds in every geo, it's probably in tens in each of these geos. So if we were to add a little bit more color, in Europe, it tends to be more centered around telco as a vertical, both for the NFV use case or even the IT use case. So that's a little bit of a European flavor that we're seeing. In North America, we've seen all verticals, even some of the 3-letter, 4-letter defense and public sector agencies have in production, to large American financial houses that I can't unfortunately name, but if I flash the logo, you would recognize, have gone in production. In fact, some of them have even actually moved from VMware workloads, what you were earlier talking about, kind of moving from mode 1 to mode 2. They've done some of that as well. So, we're continuing to see that more and more. The other dimension we're also seeing is OpenStack, at least 2-3 years ago, was just I want to get to an infrastructure as a service implementation. Now you're seeing more of OpenStack is only an ingredient in the solution. We would like to get to a storage as a service implementation, or we want to get to a PaaS and IaaS converged into one implementation, et cetera. So it's real and it's happening now.
Yeah, so for example, we have a joint customer in Swisscom in Europe who uses OpenStack as part of a PaaS solution to provide Cloud Foundry, and they have a number of customers in production on that in turn. So yeah, it's a foundation for other things as well.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned, one of the earlier slides I had was on OpenStack as a cloud platform, and that management tools can layer atop it to essentially connect different cloud environments or provide a more in-depth version of management tools that you might need. Platform as a service is another tool that you might layer atop of an OpenStack environment to provide a developer interaction point. And so that ties into one specific use case of cloud of these net new kind of developer-centric use cases that are about enabling part of your workforce on becoming more productive. Yeah. And that's certainly one enterprise use case. Do you find that that is the largest driver for OpenStack adoption today?
It definitely. I think OpenStack and agility kind of go hand in hand. And you bring in the developer lens, either from the perspective of, hey, I don't want to stand in a long line to get my workload into production, or fundamentally even change the way in which they're moving from cutting code to production using a DevOps model. Both are conversations that we are engaged in and day out. And just to throw one more angle at it, which is the whole interest and excitement around containers, is actually helping have a much richer conversation with OpenStack as the kind of the underlying layer, and on top of that, you want to get to a platform as a service DevOps environment with containers and microservices as an architecture construct, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an exciting time to be in the industry, I would say.
Yeah, develop once, run anywhere. Docker certainly, and some other container projects certainly tie into that concept of if we're at the front end of developing the next generation of our applications, what should we use for that? And some folks say containers. Some folks, it's virtual machines using different cloud platforms. Do you find common interest on essentially trying to build these net new applications based on containers, or do you say it's a good mix between virtual machines and containers? Darren, why don't you take that one?
I think it's a healthy mix right now. I think containers are just starting to catch everyone's imagination about what's possible and what they're capable of. Within the OpenStack projects, Magnum is maturing with every passing month and week, and we happen to have the PTL for Magnum at Rackspace, and we're doing a lot of really interesting work to enable containers as a service on top of our OpenStack platforms. But the lion's share of our conversations are still happening at the VM level.
Agreed.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about the container space and some of the overlap between platform as a service and containers. So there's this element of Docker being the first container technology that really made provisioning to containers easy. And that was part of the appeal. It made it very easy to use a technology that's been around for quite some time. And it's certainly risen, it's certainly timely in today's market. Now, platform as a service similarly tries to abstract some of the complexity away from provisioning resources and makes it very easy to provision resources. Do you see that a lot of your customers pick platform as a service or Docker, or do you find the combined effort for each of those? Darren or Radesh?
Look, from our perspective, what we are seeing is the community has kind of spoken loudly rather, in terms of Docker being the container format of preference, Kubernetes being the orchestration engine of preference. So that's why our platform as a service offering is engineered with these two as the fundamental building blocks, right? So we bring that sort of notion of the opinionated platform as a service on top of these building blocks, which are adopted widely by the community, right? That's where the innovation is, and that's where the forward momentum is.
Yeah, and so you're essentially working with OpenShift to layer atop your own OpenStack distribution. Darren, are you seeing the same side from other platform as a service sides?
Well, I think I'm kind of proud of, proud is the right word. We have definitely taken a wait and see approach on PaaS. I think, TD Bank, when Graham was on stage earlier, he was talking about the fact that they haven't even tried to tackle PaaS yet because they're still trying to get the eccentricities of infrastructure as a service down. So Rackspace, because we provide fanatical support and an as a service model, we sort of have to wait to see which platforms become the de facto standard. You talk about OpenStack being the de facto standard. We haven't seen across any of these PaaS options yet a de facto standard for PaaS. So to date, we've kind of taken a wait and see approach, and I think it's going to be really interesting in the coming months as we look at our managed containers services that we're spending most of our time on this spring. Whether managed containers, do we still have to, will we have to have a PaaS strategy a year from now, or will managed containers be able to provide that layer?
Yeah, and I've seen consistent data on that. It's very similar adoption use cases across the different PaaS examples out there.
Yeah.
So before you were talking about the example of Swisscom and enabling telco use cases with OpenStack, and that has been a big point of contention. For those that have been following the OpenStack movement, there's a lot of talk about Neutron and its maturity. So for those not familiar, Neutron is the networking project within OpenStack. And it is very well known, very established. It's not nothing sassy or new, saying that it's one of the lesser mature projects. And it's getting there. It's had the most amount of additions to code this past summit. There's a lot of progress made. But there's still critique about its existing architecture and its ability to serve telco use cases. And just wanted to hear, as an SDN player in the market that has been working with telcos on OpenStack use cases, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think when you think about Neutron, it's important to draw a distinction between the APIs and the code. The API is generally used, and we respond to that, other vendors do as well. A lot of what makes a difference is what you do behind the scenes with that. And the reason we're drawn in, and part of the reason why we've now become partners with Rackspace in this, is to, in more advanced cases where people begin to concern themselves with performance, scalability, operations, being able to see everything. And one that comes up particularly, when you're a plumber, you got to plumb all sorts of things together. One of the things that happens in this notion of bimodal is a lot of times people say, well, yes, I have this whole new cloud environment, I write an application, but I have this clunky old database and I got to get some data out of that about a transaction history or balance or whatever. So part of why they bring us in is because we have a number of features and capabilities to reach back into that legacy environment and provide secure connections into that enable those new cloud applications to present that older data. So that's another reason why we brought in beyond the basic Neutron.
Okay. And then in terms of overall architecture, there's a lot of comments about whether Neutron can accommodate some of the more complex networking topologies out there, or architectures. Typically, do you work with a client at that point, or are you typically working with them on an earlier example when it specifically comes to security of SDN?
Historically, what's happened is that people run into the problems and then they come see us.
Especially when it comes to the network.
Right. And they run into bottlenecks with the architecture as originally conceived. Increasingly, what we're trying to do is get the word out ahead of time so that they can plan for that from the very beginning and avoid some of those bottlenecks.
Yeah, and so one of the slides I showed earlier was about how prominent it is for organizations to essentially connect their OpenStack environment to public cloud environments, to external options. How often do you work with organizations on enabling that connectivity and ability to connect those two environments?
Right, certainly between private clouds and public clouds, and then as I said, because those are actually kind of clear, because at least they're both conceived of as clouds.
Yeah.
The real brain teasers are often, either cloud, private cloud, say, all the way back to a bare metal machine running a database that they need something out of, and so forth. So providing those capabilities as well, and those always come up when you're in the plumbing business. No telling what they're going to want to hook up to their plumbing.
Yeah. All right, so shifting focus a little bit, so back to enterprise use cases. I talked a lot about different options for adopting OpenStack. There are ways in which you can do it direct, use a distro, use a managed service, use a converged managed service. When you look at organizations that decide not to engage with partners, when they take a step back and they say, we're going to go at this alone. There were certainly those use cases early on adoption, the unicorns of the OpenStack community. And a lot of generalizations about OpenStack start with those use cases, with those examples of folks that are in this DIY type model.
Yep.
What would you say are the characteristics of those organizations that are successful at that model? And what makes that unique for a particular organization and not a typical use case? So why don't we start with Radesh and then...
Yeah, so if you look at the universe of customers either planning to or have adopted OpenStack, you can think of a classical pyramid, right? The tippy top are the ones that DIYs.
Yeah.
You asked about characteristics that typically they are willing to throw a lot of bodies at the equation, right? So that's the bottom line reality. They are willing to invest human resources to not just stand it up, but live with it and care and feed that infrastructure because it's so central to the way they want to move their business moving, the PayPals of the world, if you will. So, but the reality also is that not every single customer out there, if you look at the total universe of enterprise customers, can afford to look at that level of investment, right? So the next tier of customers that I see are the ones who are either looking at a combination of, hey, look, I can invest resources to manage this on a one-to-many, just like I manage my current infrastructure, or I'm comfortable having a distro brought in by an SI or an OEM in conjunction with the hardware. So that's the next tier. The third and emerging tier, which is where I think the announcement we did this morning comes into picture as well, is the ones that are saying, hey, look, even if you kind of gave me money, I don't want to actually be in the business of managing this infrastructure. But guess what? I want the openness, I want the flexibility, I want the agility, et cetera, but my dollars in terms of headcount, et cetera, is already spoken for. And if you can get me to an OpEx model, kind of best of both the worlds. And that's where, Rackspace value proposition shines through brilliantly.
Yeah.
So,
I do agree with Radesh that size is the most common characteristic of the do-it-yourselfer, that they have IT staffs in the hundreds of people, and they can invest. They always have built their own solutions to any problem dating back years and years and years, and they have the staff and the ability to do that. What I find really fascinating is that even those customers, some of the largest customers that we serve, they absolutely have the money, the headcount, and the intent to want to be able to know all the answers to all of their own questions, but they will still look for a partnership with Rackspace as another set of eyes, an insurance policy. Even the ones that are trying to do DIY, some of the biggest companies in the world that have figured out DIY, I find interesting that they still see value in a managed option or just another set of eyes or a team of experts that they've paid to have on retainer, that if their team gets into a question they haven't answered before, but they know Rackspace has seen it in one of our multiple deployments, they'll still reach out to the people who created OpenStack, the largest contributors to OpenStack. They still need these kinds of partnerships to find their way, even the big companies that have the ability to throw money at the problem.
That's a good point. Every once in a while I get a request saying, hey, can you create a business model whereby based on the number of calls I make, can I pay you? That's not our business model. I mean, we have a distribution, you pay an annual subscription, that's it.
Yeah.
I can't create a new model of doing business.
Yeah.
But to his point, I think there is definitely a recognition that, considering the pace at which innovation is happening, having shoulders that are knowledgeable to lean on is a need that's emerging.
Almost
Together
like
we can
an
figure that out.
OpenStack expert hotline.
There is this sort of aspect of cloud that people need to get their head wrapped around a little bit, I think, which is, with cloud we often focus on things like, oh, it's API driven, it's infrastructure as code and stuff like this. But there's this other aspect, which is a sort of business cultural aspect, which is we as a business, our customers, we want to be concentrating our IT investment on creating things that customers can see, the applications, the user interface, and so forth. And what that means is I want to have less of my investment in creating an army of experts who are making all of this infrastructure happen. And that's what creates a business model for, I think the three companies up here.
Yeah, and it touches on that concept of, and as much as I don't like the extreme of the concept of bimodal IT, but this concept of you've got a group focused on net new, focused on enabling these new use cases. Who do they want helping out and looking at their backend environment? Do they want a team that's more focused on systems of record, or do they want a third-party team that specializes in OpenStack that will help them move forward? And one thing you guys mentioned on is staff. So throwing bodies at the problem. One of the things I've heard time and time again from a lot of folks is it's an interesting background that you look for when you're trying to train an OpenStack expert. They need to be a Linux admin for the most part, depending on what role they're going to be serving in the support. And often you need some sort of open source experience, if not OpenStack. And it's hard to find, especially depending on where you're located. If you're on the coast, it's a bit easier. If you're located in Middle America, it can be a bit more challenging. And then once you do spend the time in the investment training, all of a sudden that employee is much more valuable.
Right.
They now also
Right.
all of a sudden have the OpenStack seal on their resume. How do you keep them? And so how many of the folks that you guys work with purposefully look for an external partner because fear of investment that very quickly leaves?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit this morning, that there was the study commissioned by SUSE and published by CIO Magazine last week that the two biggest threats are lack of talent and complexity. And so there's absolutely that fear that these companies that are not technology companies will hire and train these people and then lose them.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing we try to do from a Rackspace perspective is be very careful not to poach our customers, because that will make your customers angry in a hurry, because they do have some investments in OpenStack talent. But I do think that based on a lot of the conversations, they do struggle with it. I don't think I haven't seen that many customer examples where they've gone out and actually taken the time to hire, train, and then lose the person. I think most of the customers I'm talking to are already at that point of, I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try. I have no interest in it. Like Larry was saying, I'm going to have my teams focused on the DevOps model, the Agile software development model, working on applications that are mission and business critical. And I want someone else. I'll have 1 to 5 people on my team who know enough about OpenStack to keep us, honest with ourselves and have some capability in-house. But beyond that, I'm looking for Rackspace or a partner to know everything behind that API, all those different configuration choices and project choices. They're not struggling with retention because they're not even trying to go find the talent, as most of the customers I'm talking to.
Yeah.
One
And
thing we
on the
started was the
networking
thing we
side.
call Plum Grid University, which
Yeah.
does training probably about 10% on our technology and more like 90% about how one does networking in OpenStack environments. And we've been very pleased with the uptake about that. Clearly there's a lot of people, even in organizations that haven't yet embraced OpenStack, there are people who are thinking about their future careers, who are investing in themselves and learning these things. I will say one interesting tidbit about that is so far a surprisingly large number of the certifications have come out of China. So an interesting adoption curve over there as well.
Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
point, Larry, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we have all sorts of training programs
do, and-
to help customers learn how to operate OpenStack, deploy Neutron, and operate it effectively. And we have courseware now on if customers actually want to get involved in contributing to the open source community. Part of the
Yeah.
OpenStack Innovation Center with Intel is teaching people that have Python development skills, teach them on how to write blueprints and how to submit code and how to get your code reviewed. And so we're trying to get people trained so they can become operators, so that more customers will at least try to get started with OpenStack, and training people how to become contributors to the community so that the whole platform moves more aggressively forward.
Yeah, from our vantage point, the skill gap is not very different from, let's say, 12, 15 years ago. There was a dearth for VMware certified professionals and people with capacity around that. So it's the same movie playing out, except that the scope and the skill set, to your point, is a little broader than just, hey, can I run a VM or virtualize and look at the blinking lights, right? So, and to the point about training and certification, our fastest growing training offering today on the market is our OpenStack set of training courses,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no question.
And we have thousands of certified professionals just in the last 18 months that across the globe that have gone through certifications that we offer, right? So this is all encouraging sign, right? Because I don't believe we need to be worried about, employee flight, et cetera. I think it's the age-old, hey, if you're not training them, then how good are they going to be, right? That's the other challenge as well, because it's a reality that you got to get into a agile
Certainly,
infrastructure and private cloud, et cetera.
And there's a number of other folks that do training programs too. The OpenStack Foundation is kicking off their training program soon. And And it's interesting. I actually work with a lot of MIT students, and they're very interested in how they always have a raffle on who gets my OpenStack hoodie when I come back from this event.
Those are valuable. Good raffle.
They are. We only have a couple of minutes left. Before we leave, let's have some fun questions. So for each of you guys, which is your favorite OpenStack project or project technical lead?
Oh, okay. So because Rackspace is world's foremost operator, and we put a lot of, we have to be able to walk the walk as well as talk the talk on what it means to actually run these environments and operate these environments and deploy them effectively and upgrade them effectively. We happen to have the PTL for documentation. So I'll go slightly off project and say we are in the nitty-gritty of what it takes to actually run and fix and deploy these. So I'll go off project and say that it's really important to us. Documentation is key, and we have Lana Brindley, who is world-class and is the documentation PTL.
Okay, and Radesh?
Okay, I'm going to duck and not choose between a heart and a lung here. Look, I love them all. I think what makes OpenStack
That's a
great
safe
is,
answer.
yeah, I know.
He loves all his children. the best.
Is the fact that
it's tough when
all
there's
these
multiple
different
PTLs
folks
in
are
one
pulling
company.
it together, right? So,
Yeah, and Larry?
Oh, say Neutron.
Yeah,
of course.
that's safe. answer.
surprise.
Very neat. And then in terms of what you're looking forward to the most for the OpenStack Foundation over the next 6 months, let me start with Larry.
I'm looking forward to a good party in Austin.
Yeah, it's going to be, we're gonna do that. And it's right in our backyard, so we'll have fun taking it over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it turns out that one of my daughters is at UT Austin, so it's kind of a nice excuse to visit her anyway. But we're going to have a lot of new demonstrations there, I'm sure, together and in their various areas. And they're always exciting. The last one, the OpenStack Summit in Tokyo, what was interesting to me, I was sitting next to a guy or standing next to a guy on the line to go to one of the events on the buses and talking to him. And he had actually taken time off of work to come to Tokyo to learn. And he just said it was so exciting to be there. And it was his first one. It was not my first one, certainly, but his first one. Just to see that kind of excitement, I suppose I'm just looking forward to more of that, more people getting excited and getting involved that way.
Yeah?
I'll give one more commercial for the OpenStack Innovation Center and our partnership with Intel. Just working on rolling upgrades are very important to us. The ability to automate and take some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, where you can have an upgrade from a version of OpenStack to a version of OpenStack without loss of your data plane and without loss of connectivity to your application. So some of the rolling upgrades work with the community and the foundation, and some of the stability work that we're doing with the foundation, super important. Very excited to integrate our certifications. I think Tony Campbell and our training team is working with the foundation to make sure that our certification matches the OpenStack Foundation certification. And then from there, it just becomes seeing Solometer get more mature, seeing Ironic, bare metal get more mature, and things like load balancer as a service. And so advancement of various features.
Projects and features. Okay.
Right, so I would call out two things, other than the great party in Austin, of course, which we're all looking forward to, and the hoodies as well that you can give it to MIT kids.
Yeah.
One is, I think we touched upon NFV, right? I think huge opportunity exists in front of the whole community from an OpenStack perspective, because this is a problem space where every single tier 1 telco has already chosen to go make OpenStack the lingua franca, if you will. Then it's a question of, can we make OpenStack carrier grade enough to meet the needs, right? So I think, clearly the foundation has a role to play, and we all as community members have a role to play. The other one, again, we touched upon that, but I think miles to go before we go to sleep in terms of containers and OpenStack integration. How do you make that experience rich enough that it's not a question of, is it a VM or a container? It's got to be physical, virtual, and container. You let the workload determine, and everything will work seamlessly, right? To get to that promised land, it takes some effort, right? So those are the two that I've in my list.
Very neat.
Good answer.
Well, thank you all. Thank
Yeah,
our
thank you.
panelists, everyone.
Thank you.
We've had a good session today, and there's a lot of information. I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but at every summit, they record the sessions that they do, where they go through and people tell their stories about OpenStack, what they're doing. They're very interesting videos, and I say that with complete transparency. I go through and watch those videos all the time, where they go through use case of problem solving for very specific complex workloads. So if you are looking for more information about specifically enterprise-level scalable workloads that have been enabled on OpenStack and problem solving for some of the challenges, there's a ton of resources out there to follow. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and let's get a round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panelists. Coming up in a few minutes, it's breakout session number 2 here on the main stage, the evolution of information security threats with Rackspace. Coming up in just